Through a Scottish Prism, the programme that is unapologetically pro-Scottish independence and anti-Westminster rule. Everything we say here is viewed through a Scottish prism. Brought to you by Barhead Boy.
Hi folks, and welcome back to Through a Scottish Prism. I hope you and yours are well. Nice to get you back. Lots again been happening. Not all of it nice. Some of it interesting. Some of it rather amusing. So let's get the gang in and let's get going. And we've got, of course, our favourite lawyer up there in Clackmannanshire, our Eva. Eva, my friend, how are you?
Hi, Roddy. Oh, I'm scunnered and angry with events at home and events abroad. It's high time that we demanded and we actually got change as opposed to broken promises.
Absolutely. And over there in Edinburgh, in Old Reekie, we've got our weatherman, Mr. Quinnan. And he owes me a quid already because he's on mute. Good morning, sir.
Yes.
How are you?
Happy Saturday to you all.
Yeah. Albeit we're going out on a Sunday. And over there, I think he's in Brussels, or is he in America? They seek him everywhere. It's the old Coatbridge Cavalier. Where are you?
Aye, hardly the elusive Pimpernel. It's easy to find me. Just give me a phone. I'm in Brussels.
Oh, there we go.
Back in Brussels. Yeah, it was great. What a great city. Honestly, fabulous. Lucky to be here right enough. The city I'm talking about after Starmer and Biden, but more on that one later.
Absolutely. And also joining us this week, we have a good friend from Dundee. It's Alan Petrie. Alan, welcome back to Prism. How are you?
Hey, Roddy, I'm doing quite well. Looking forward to two important meetings that I've got this month. One in Dundee to reinvigorate the independence movement within the city of Dundee, and another one in Perth to set up a Salvo Tayside organisation to get the message out into the streets and into the communities.
Yeah, well, we need to, we're going to come on to them later, the by-elections, the low turnouts. We need to do something to stimulate some interest. And maybe we can do a wee bit of that here. But I'd really like to start with something. I mean, there's so many things wrong with the British Union. There's so many reasons why we all want to leave the British Union and see Scotland being an independent country. And here's one of the reasons. I'm not even going to make comment on it. I'll just put the headline. This is one of the reasons. The nonsense, the stupidity, the absolute idiocy of the British Union. A horse getting an OBE. God almighty. If they gave one for horses' arses, everyone in Westminster would be getting an award, wouldn't they?
Well, it makes a change from donkeys getting one.
Oh yeah, donkey arses. A lot of them. But anyway, on to other things of this week. Now, right, one of the things at the beginning of the week was an announcement by our First Minister, Eva. Medical equipment, 19,000 of surplus supplies in the NHS. For a start, I've got to say I was surprised that there was any surplus. I always thought there was a shortage. But I'll come on to it. But they also sent it to Ukraine, where, some people might, like me, don't agree with that. I would have rather seen it going to Palestine or Syria or Lebanon where it's needed, but a surplus that were given away, and very much it would seem to me that John gave it away, sort of British foreign policy, give it to Ukraine and win some brownie points.
Yeah, it was virtue signalling. It was an unforced error. He did it deliberately. He was in London having meetings, including one with the ambassador from Ukraine. And that's when he had this show of largesse, followed up swiftly with the press releases. And I think what was most concerning for me was the sheer arrogance of the man in claiming that £800,000 worth of surplus equipment could go to Ukraine in the first place. But he went on to explain that it would have no impact on the NHS in Scotland at all, because it was stuff that was surplus to requirements. So I looked a wee bit further into the press release to find out exactly what was involved. And John Swinney actually owes the people of Scotland a detailed explanation beyond his initial arrogance, because the equipment includes 180 electric height adjustable beds with newly procured replacement batteries. So I wondered, what does 180 beds represent in Scotland? How many hospital beds are there in Scotland? And there's 13,587. You're not telling me that less than 150 of those will need to be repaired or replaced per annum. So I cannot understand why 180 is a surplus. There were 130 NHS standard mattresses going. 130 mattresses. How much do they cost? Where could we have stored them here for when we need them again, as we undoubtedly will? But from a Ukrainian context, 130 mattresses isn't going to be anything like what they actually need. It'll be a drop in a massive ocean. But other stuff that's going, 220 oxygen concentrators and 50 ICU ventilators. By what stretch of the imagination can those items possibly be surplus to Scottish requirements? They can't be. So I think that it's very clear that John Swinney owes, as I said, a detailed explanation to the people of Scotland about why this stuff is surplus in the first place and who designated it as surplus, who decided it was surplus, how long has the NHS been running at a surplus? Because what's stuck in the press release is that this is from COVID. It's a leftover from COVID. Well, it's not, because the opening line says that the beds have just been got newly procured replacement batteries. So that's not a COVID surplus. But I'm sick to the back teeth hearing that there are problems in the NHS which arise as the cost of the union. And now we learn this isn't the cost of the union. This is the largesse of a devolved government with a fixed budget giving away our stuff that we may very well need with absolutely no heed to the public purse or public perception or public opinion at all. And it's this kind of government, incompetent government, that's damaging the independence movement because they're acting first and thinking later, if even then, and it's not on.
What do you think, Lloyd? Virtue signalling or a great act of kindness, or was it surplus?
I think it was monumental stupidity, but nothing new in that. Does John Swinney really know what's going on in the world at the moment? In a week where another country has been drawn into Israel's spiraling death throes, and they're bombing the south of the Lebanon, killing medical staff. But John thinks it's a good idea to send what he claims as surplus medical supplies to the Ukraine. When we've had stories in the newspapers in the past 2 weeks about people who came here from Ukraine, refugees who are currently returning back to the Ukraine for medical appointments. They're going back to go to the dentist and then returning here. There have been 3 stories along those lines in the newspapers in the past 10 days. Now, I don't have an issue if we have surplus. There was a time about 15, 20 years ago when it was discovered we had a surplus in the fire and rescue department, and a number of fire engines and appliances were refurbished and were actually sent to Palestine. Now, that, I think, was a very, very good idea. I'm not so certain that sending beds and mattresses and ICU units to the Ukraine makes any sense whatsoever. But what it does tell us very, very clearly is that John Swinney and the current SNP government are following word for word, line for line, British foreign policy.
Yep.
Now, this on a day when we've discovered that yesterday the Israeli Defense Forces threatened the United Nations troops on the border in Lebanon, who just happened to be members of the Irish Defence Forces. On the day when they were threatened, and Ireland and the Irish Defence Forces told them to go away, that they were there, they were peacekeepers, their job was to keep the peace, not to do what Israel tells it. Now, how John can't see that we need to start thinking in similar terms to the Irish when it comes to these issues, instead of simply poodling along, trotting along behind Britain in its post-imperial torpor, It's terrible. It's just terrible.
Can I just say on that to Israel, not that I want to help you in any way, shape or form, but you might think, fighting Hezbollah and Hamas is a bit of a problem. Don't mess with the Irish, mate. Ask the British about it. Do not mess with the Irish. You'll come off a lot worse. It could be over in days. Phil, again, I go back to sending. We know, as Lloyd alluded to there, hospitals are not being bombed and destroyed in Ukraine, whatever you think of the Ukrainian-Russian war, whatever. But we do know that hospitals have been attacked by the Israelis in the Syria and Palestine and Gaza. Surely, if John was so desperate to give away this equipment, it would have been better sending it to where it really was needed.
Yeah, agreed. It is virtue signalling by John. The guy, I mean, Lloyd's right. The guy, you would say, grow a spine, John. Ireland is the way forward for the Celtic people, and the Scots are very, very similar in their outlook, But John's long gone. He's sold us out. He's doing what he's told, as we've said for quite some time. So he will comply with instructions from his master in his masters in London. The only positive thing about that, I would say, is it's not military support for a change. It is medical supplies, which Scotland should be providing. That is us. That's who we should be. When we can afford it, as Eva's pointed out as well. It's a bit like taking one of the wonderful ideas during the independence campaign or afterward was taking one of these shambolic aircraft carriers that Britain have built and turning it into a hospital ship, sending that off the coast of Gaza. That would be what a true measure of the Scots, but it's not going to happen while we continue to kowtow to Her Majesty's or His Majesty's forces and powers. So to hell with it. And the other thing about it is, there was a statement he said he used it was political. He was just repeating in this message that Britain and the West has been saying about Ukraine and the Russian invasion. This is the latest equipment has been identified as being surplus, as they say. But when the Telegraph was reporting that bed blocking in Scotland hospitals by patients who are well enough to be the stars has reached record high because the overall system is in such a bad nick. It's mostly elderly people who've got no place to go. There's no care in the community. The cuts in healthcare in Scotland are decimating the healthcare industry. This business, it is a business, but it's something that we take great pride in the fact that we have free healthcare. But what kind of state it's in? If you're giving what little we have away instead of fixing what is fundamental and key to our survival, is wrong, especially under the circumstances. If this continues and people from Ukraine are actually going back home to get dental and healthcare, that's a tragic reflection. No, John, you got it wrong again.
Yeah, it's consistent if nothing else. Alan, now you encounter the NHS daily with issues. What did you think? Did you think, well, this is surplus and this is a good thing to do? Or can you see this could have been used better?
This angered me. As most of the viewers will know, I've got a child with exceptional complex medical needs, and I'm also an advocate for many families with children of the same conditions. If you have a surplus of equipment, it means you're buying the wrong equipment. That's what that means. I'll take Megan's example as one. We've been waiting over a year to get a bed for Megan because she's outgrowing the child's bed. This bed is large, so it's like a big cot, and it's the only bed she could sleep in because she'll roll out the other ones. Even the normal hospital bed, she gets her legs over. Nine Wells Hospital has one of these beds in the children's unit. None of these beds in the adult services. Aberdeen, when we had Megan in for her operation for gastrostomy, had none of these beds. She had to be put into a baby's cot, which was unacceptable. So if they've got normal hospital beds and surplus, then you're buying the wrong equipment because that's not the beds that are needed. The beds that are needed are these specialist beds. We have the same problem with lots of other equipment, such as suction machines, wheelchairs. Trying to get equipment off of the NHS is like pulling teeth. So how the hell have we got a surplus of equipment going abroad into a war zone? Now, we've already spent millions of pounds in Scotland, billions of pounds in the UK, sending to Ukraine. Spend it on medical aid instead of war aid. That's what they're needing. Stop supporting the buying of bombs and start looking after the bairns of these countries. Because our bairns are in as much need as well.
Here, Alan, well said. I agree with you wholeheartedly. On this, but on domestic matters, we got, Eva, a new leader of the English Conservative and Unionist Party Scottish branch office. The supervisors are Mr. Russell Finlay, who informed us all that, the SNP needed to reality check, they needed to wake up, to listen to the voters, all this sort of stuff. And I thought, my. Do you think you lost in July because you were listening to the voters? But here's his best one. He has been saying he's a Democrat originally, but they intend to boycott independence debates. They intend to cut out at least 50% of the population have not to have a voice. That seems to be the equivalent. I mean, that really is the epitome of the English Conservative and Unionist Party, is it not? You will not be allowed to speak up the back of the bus, Jock.
Absolutely, but the interesting thing for me is Russell Finlay is a very smooth operator. I met him a couple of years ago, actually, at an event in George Square. It was the International Day of Remembrance of people who'd been lost to addiction, and I had quite an interesting conversation with him at that time. He's a very intelligent man. He obviously has a background, as you'll know, as a researcher, a journalist, and a bit of a pioneer in investigative matters. So he's got a wealth of experience, a very broad base of knowledge and understanding. And I think he is not to be underestimated because he's really pretty shrewd. That wee headline that he grabbed for himself was quite a good one because it's got people talking like us. And I think that we would underestimate him at our peril. But you're right, telling half the population to shut it is not wise, but his name's on everybody's lips because he said it. So by no stretch of the imagination is he daft. He knows exactly what he's doing, and he's obviously come up through the ranks very, very quickly, and that space was made, that gap was created for him because he's the anointed, chosen one, very much got the ear of the Tories in Westminster and the establishment and the men in the grey suits, etc. So I would say watch this space because he'll be doing all he can, not just to disrupt the independence movement, but also to counteract the threat that his party faces from reform, given the sizable vote that they're now attracting. I see they actually won a council by-election the other day with 36% of the vote. So Russell's got a lot on his plate. He's going to have to try to continue to divide the independence movement on one flank, if you like, and on the other, he's got to direct his energy against reform as well as Labour. So he's got several different fights on his hands, but I think that he will deliver a few bloody noses in his time, and he'll certainly do that in Holyrood because he is good at debating. He's able to speak without having to read everything that he says. So he is somebody that is actually quite a worthy challenger, sorry to say.
Lloyd, when you heard him saying that, needed a reality check, the SNP, it was a bit hypocritical, was it not?
Yeah, just a tad, Roddy, just a tad. I mean, two things about Russell Finlay. I mean, I think his primary function is to stop the Conservatives going into a further and more deadly tailspin than they're already in, as Eva's outlined. He's here to save them from reform. The second thing is, and again, Eva's absolutely correct, this is a man who's got a nose for a story. And I think it's you know that exactly from the fact that he's got a headline out of nothing. When was the last time the SNP debated independence? Give me come on, give me a break, Russell. Even you know that that's total and complete drivel. When's this all going to end? The Tories constantly going on about the fact that the SNP just talk about independence all the time, and then there's us who are actually part of the independence movement going, when are the SNP actually going to talk about independence? It's a strange upside down kind of Alice in Wonderland world we're living in at the moment. But I think it's going to be very interesting seeing Russell Finlay operate, because he does have, as I said, a nose for a story, a nose for a headline. But I also get the impression from him that, unlike many members of the Parliament, he's maybe actually in touch with people out there in the street. Maybe not the people I hang about with, but he certainly is a bit more connected to what's going on. So in that case, and by that metric, he's definitely the guy to counter reform if you can counter reform. Or, as I would see it, is reform really the rising thing that we think it is at the moment? How much of that is actually going to break on through? But I think Russell Finlay's whole kind of demeanour in the chamber, he takes his time. He's careful with his words. He doesn't also feel the need, like so many of them, to bite back at other members of the Parliament. He tends to take a kind of more laid-back approach in his criticism, which means it's much, much more effective in reality. I think it will be interesting, as Eva says, to see how he performs. But he genuinely has two jobs. Number one, make the Conservatives relevant again in Scotland, and secondly, make sure that they don't get obliterated by reform at the Scottish Parliament election. And that's it.
Yeah, they've not been relevant since 1955. I mean, I know you guys are talking them up here, but he beat Murdo Fraser in an election. Really, not an achievement, is it? I mean, everyone beats Murdo Fraser in an election. But what actually happened, Phil, was I've also heard that Russell Finlay does agree with Murdo on a couple of things, and one of them is possibly breaking away from the English Conservative Unionist Party and starting a separate, although would operate separately in Scottish elections, council elections, but at general elections they would go back under the whip of the Conservative Party in England. Could this be a winning strategy for the right wing?
No, I sincerely hope it's just another case of the Popular Front of Judea, because they just don't have the following in Scotland. As you quite rightly said, they haven't won an election in Scotland since 1955. We don't like you. We don't want you, Russell Finlay. And another thing, one other reason I would say stands out, it's not because he's a genius or brilliant. It's because he's basically competent. That's the stark contrast with the majority of politicians we've had in the UK of late, particularly in Scotland. It's been a shambles. I mean, you look at some of the stuff. Boris Johnson, from then on, it's embarrassing. So the fact that he's competent doesn't mean he's not the Messiah. He's a very naughty boy type of thing. Go back to Monty Python, but because he's in charge of the Tories, and that's what they're all like, So anyway, I'm sure something will come out about Russell before too long, because it usually does if you're a Tory MP or Tory representative. But with just over half the voters wanting independence, his speech, he's cutting out the majority. For starters, and the Herald reported that what he said, the dream of Scottish independence is dead. That's what he said in his first speech to party members. Oh, shut up, Finlay. I mean, it's rubbish. It's the Conservative Party conference in Birmingham. In Birmingham, he's making this speech to appeal to voters who'd been disillusioned with Scottish politics. Well, I don't think there's many in Birmingham, but there you go. But the majority of his speech focused on the party had made mistakes, and the admission of guilt when you're in the defeated position is a good start, because everybody knows that. He's talking about the long journey back to win voters over. And the thing is, the case for independence is stronger than it's ever been. Again, you mentioned it earlier, we need the unity. We absolutely need that unity to take it for ourselves and shut people like this guy Finlay up for good.
Yeah, I mean, this is the theme of this show this week, folks, is the fact that I keep saying it and I say it to you every week, the British Union's never been weaker. It's there for the taking. We just need to put a few things in place. But back to Mr. Finlay, Alan. We've heard this tune so many times. They talked about, in 2014 it was so divisive and violent and terrible. That whole, you're like, what? No, not till the Unionists arrived on the 19th of September. They just make up this, and as Lloyd said, we've got to stop talking about independence. When did we miss it? Same old, new face, same shit.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. I mean, on murder of Fraser, I mean, that poor man would lose a coronation. But, I mean, the Tories in Scotland are irrelevant, and their leadership is irrelevant. Because what matters is who is going to be elected down in Westminster, because that is the one who's going to make the decisions. Now, they've already dug through that barrel, they went through the bottom of it, and now they're heading to Middle Earth for the next leader. So more or less back to where Thatcher was. That's the area that we're going to have to look at. In Scotland, all he is trying to do is gather the staunch unionist vote, which is a very, very small vote. And he's got a problem because he's now got 4 unionist parties he's got to deal with. So if the independence movement unite properly, the independence parties start taking constructive criticism seriously instead of attacking people for doing it, then possibly we will have a strategy going into 2026 where we can free this nation and become an independent country. Because without that unity, we're up shit creek.
We are indeed. I agree. We say it every week on here. We need that constitutional convention because there's an underlying things going on here, Eva. We were talking before we started recording. But there was some by-elections this week with some interesting numbers. If I could start with Strathmore, it seems this, both in your area, we'll come to you, of course, Alan, in Dundee, where the SNP took the seat. Now, that's, a few years ago wouldn't have been a surprise, but the Labour Party, not winning this seat was a surprise. It seems, as our title of this show, the honeymoon seems to be over already. But 2 or 3 things in these numbers, Eva. One, the SNP holding the seat and winning the first of the votes, but also the minor parties starting to pick up some good results.
Yeah, well, I think the other one in Dundee was Lochee, where I think that did Alba get something like 5.5% of the vote.
Yeah.
You can analyse that a lot of different ways, though, and Alan will be more up on the detail than I am. But you have to ask yourself what this represents when you look at the turnout, because the turnout in both of these by-elections was exceptionally low. See, that one in Lochee, 21.4. The other one in Strathmartin was about 22%.
Yep.
So obviously 8 out of 10 people are staying at home and not coming out to vote. This is why we need mass voter registration, particularly in the areas that are unfortunately high deprivation, because those are the people that need to be motivated, A, to get on the register, and B, to actually come out and vote. And that's where the independence movement has got to get the job done and give them motivation, and not just promise and make empty promises of change, but actually explain and show how change will in fact be delivered, because it's clearly not going to be delivered by Labour. And I think that these 2 by-elections on their own show that folk have seen the wheels coming off the Labour bus. I mean, that issue that you learned of during the week, I think it was, about the £4 million from the hedge fund to the Labour Party paid just before the election rules came into play. We've got the continuing fallout of winter fuel payments. We've got issues, there you go, red Tory, blue Tory, etc. We're back to the Panama Papers, tax havens, one law for the rich, another one for the rest of us. And I think that people now see through Keir Starmer very, very plainly and see that really all that he's doing is a Tory light agenda in some respects, but in others he's probably more punitive than the Tories, because he's saying the things that the Tories would possibly have been a wee bit too scared to say, about people getting out to work and cracking down on benefits and what have you, speaking in terms of suggesting, and very many of his ministers are suggesting and saying plainly that if you survive on benefits, there's something wrong, you should be out working, as if people choose a life on benefits even when you're unwell, because they're now targeting people that are long-term sick. And you just wouldn't know where to stop. So I'm really hopeful that what we'll see in the independence movement is what Alan was talking about, proper unity, that constitutional convention that we keep talking about. What I don't want is the SNP to think, well, we've won these 2 by-elections, we can sit in our rooms. They definitely should not be doing that. The turnout was so low that they have got a lot of work to do to persuade people to vote for our country, as opposed to always putting party first. We need to have a collective where it's the community spirit and the looking after the country and thinking about the future properly in an unselfish manner that is not party centred or party orientated, because we've got to get away from that. The unionist parties look after each other, but they look after themselves. The independence movement has to do the same thing. We should cherish each other in the independence movement and make sure that we're driving forwards all the time, not constantly being destructive. It's constructive thought and conduct that's needed, and that's why we need that unity, that convention, and all shoulders to the wheel. I can't understand why John Swinney's down in London meeting foreign ambassadors when he could be in Edinburgh phoning round other leaders within the movement and making something concrete happen. You have to question his motivation and his purpose.
Absolutely. Lloyd, on these elections, I give the caveat they were a low turnout, and that's been not just in Scotland but throughout the UK, because people, it seems, good Scottish word, are scunnered with politics and politicians because they've been let down by them all. However, the fact that the SNP, retain the seat, win the seat, and that the minor parties then start getting 5% and 6%, it wasn't. I mean, Alba has been bumping along at 1-2% and suddenly get 6% in the last two elections. ISP getting 8.5% in their one. And at first we thought maybe it was an outlier, but there seems to be a pattern. There is an opportunity there for us to grow our independence movement if we make the correct steps.
I think you're absolutely right, Roddy. But having campaigned as often as I have over the years, I look at those two results and remind myself of what it is to actually run campaigns like this. I would be deeply, deeply worried if I was a branch or constituency organiser in any of the political parties at the moment. You're only 18 months out or less than that from a Scottish Parliament election, and turnout's bumping along at 20%, 21, 22%. That's deeply, deeply worrying. I mean, that speaks to a disengagement, absolutely. I also look at the numbers of votes for a multi-member ward of that size. I would say that even though the SNP held and won the seats, I can't really believe that their vote has actually come out properly. That strikes me as being the membership. That, for that area of the city of Dundee, the membership of the SNP must be close to what that vote is. So if you're depending entirely on only the people who are active members of your organisation, then you're in big trouble unless you go on a recruitment drive. Another thing I would say, and I think this is kind of important with these two by-elections and the others that took place this week, there is clearly a reaction against the Labour Party. You can see that in the way that the votes transfer against each other. Now, in a week, where the Labour Party has been mired in scandal, in the period just after they've taken away the winter heating allowance, of course there was going to be a reaction against the Labour Party. But what's astonishing about this is the reaction has not come in a powerful way whatsoever. As everyone has mentioned, 80% of the electorate stayed at home. And effectively, the membership of the Scottish National Party in those two wards came out and saved the party. But if our politics are now reduced to 1 in 5 people taking an interest, then we're in a difficult place. But if I was the leader of the Scottish National Party, if I was the First Minister of the country, this would really set alarm bells going. Because if you imagine, as the leader of the Scottish National Party going into the Scottish election in 2026, and you're depending on winning on a margin from a turnout somewhere between 20 and 30%, you've given up. You're effectively saying surrender. You're effectively saying to people, don't bother. Politics is so broken, don't bother coming out. If there isn't a real active attempt by our parliament, never mind the government, by our parliament, to re-engage with people, and get people back on the voters' roll, but more importantly, motivated enough to actually go out and vote, then we're in trouble going into 2026. And the damage for us as members of the independence movement could be huge. Because in reality, the people who delivered the most important results, particularly in 2014 at the independence referendum, were the very same people who in increasing numbers have not been coming out to vote since that time. Yeah. These are the people who've internalized that concept of alienation, that idea that nobody really cares about them. They came out, they played their part in 2014, and they've had nothing whatsoever from the independents or from the independent supporting parties to keep them on board. There's a necessity here for a campaign, but that campaign will require leadership. And frankly, we ain't got that leadership in the Scottish Government at the moment.
No, we don't. I would say they also turned out in 2015, Phil. There was a huge turnout for people like yourself when we got 56 out of 59 seats. And it's been going down since then. Now, I go back to, it's a small number. All the by-elections with the people being scunnered everywhere. But there is surely seeds of hope in there that the independence movement, if we get our act together, we can very quickly turn this round and become independent very quickly.
I think these numbers it's very hard to judge anything with such low turnout, because really low turnouts really skew the figures. It's really difficult to see what the true shape and true minds of the 80% or the vast majority who did not show up, other than the fact that they are disenfranchised and that we know we need to get them back on board and understand that their voice does matter and to make it heard. Now the SNP won, I think, in Lochee 55 votes, 1203, 1148. It's like membership. This pretty much what it is. It's getting your membership out to vote, and if you're relying on that, as has been said earlier, you're toast, because that is an appalling score. It really is. Based on the turnout, it's enough to win, but it's like the Labour by-election. You know, they managed to hang on to their vote, but they didn't increase. It actually went down in the Labour general election. Just everybody else collapsed, SNP in Scotland and the Tories in England. So it really, no matter what anybody says about it, you have to say, okay, SNP won 2 seats in Dundee, in that area. But the manner in which they won is no cause for celebration. They'll pretend it is. They'll talk it up. But clearly there's an underlying trend here that there is severe disenfranchisement with every party in Scotland. And in spite of indie voters, the independence vote still sitting around the 50% mark. We need that unification more than ever to stop the infighting, get rid of these shysters. The problem is we will never get it with John Swinney at the helm. We will never get it while Nicola Sturgeon still holds sway. We'll never get it with the shysters that have taken over the SNP and are running it for their own benefit and not the benefit of the people in our country. So, it sickens me to see it. I don't think anybody should be too happy to celebrate. 5% of what, when you talk about Alapa and we look about ISP climbing, well, it's 5%. Their vote really didn't increase by very much, but if you have a small number and the majority of the turnout, and you measure it against a number that's in decline, of course your percentage goes up. I don't think the numbers in to crow about for either ISP or Alapa. Again, it's just the weird numbers and facts that are thrown up by such a small turnout that makes these figures seem good for some and even worse for others. But all in all, it's a sad indictment of where democracy is in Scotland these days. It's struggling. We're really in bad shape.
Well, indeed. Now, it's your backyard, Alan. You know these 2 seats and all the players and the stood, etc. What's your take on these 2 by-elections?
Yeah, I mean, the problem with by-elections with PR is they could be deceiving. Now, the Strathmartin ward, where it looks like the SNP won a seat from Labour. Yeah, Labour did lose that seat. But the last council election, the SNP had two candidates, both had councillors, whose first preference votes were far higher than the two Labour votes, first preference votes. So any by-election where it is one candidate from each party, SNP were always going to take that back because you just didn't have enough to get the third seat and the third and fourth. So that's how Labour got in. But when you're dealing with by-elections, that's where your core vote comes out. Now, if you've not got a big core vote, and smaller parties usually do this quite well. Unfortunately, in this case, it didn't happen. You use your core vote to come out to get you a base. Then you start hitting a localised issue to get people motivated to come out to vote for you as a protest vote. And once they've voted for you once, it's a lot easier for them then to give you another vote at another election. That's what's went wrong. And when you look at small turnouts, I mean, 80% of people rejected every single candidate and every single party at those elections. That's ridiculous. We've got to change that. But when you're dealing with by-elections, to learn your lessons, you don't look at the percentages. You look at the votes, because percentages are very deceiving. When you look at the votes, even with Alba, who increased their percentage of vote to over 5%, their actual vote went down from the last council election. And if you don't accept that and see there is a problem there, you'll never, ever be able to deal with that problem and rectify it. And the other thing political parties have got to learn, time and time again, we've said it, is people are sick and tired of seeing you at an election time. If you really want to get people motivated to come out and vote for you, then work for them from one election to the next election. So you're not just there to get your bum on a council seat or a Westminster seat or a Scottish Parliament seat. People want you there all the time, doing something, fixing their small problems that they have. Because it might be a small problem to us, it's a big problem to them. And if you could show them that you're competent enough to deal with that and help the communities, then you've got more chance of them coming out and voting for you. But looking at percentages is a big mistake. You've got to look at the votes, and you've got to increase your core vote and give members of the other parties some reason to actually come and give you their support as well.
Here. And to the independence parties, let me tell you this, the biggest mistake that the SNP have made is we, the voters, gave you one job and one job only. We didn't give you things to go and help British foreign policy or to bring in social change or to listen to lobbyists to bring in what you think is equality. You got one job only. And if you do that one job only, then you will win by we'll weigh your vote. We won't even count them. That's your problem. It is really that simple. And I'm not a smart man, but I know that. And it's time that you did. But Eva, the problem is people are so disgusted with politics, politicians, the grifting, the freebies, everything else. But it's the stupidity, and it's not just reserved to one party. Now, I need someone to help me with this one. And Eva, you're the smartest person in this group. And I need you to tell me how this can possibly happen. In Labour, the Stirling Labour Party in the council decided to put this councillor, who had been suspended for 6 months for being a bully, they made him the head of the group that was going to be against anti-bullying. Make that sensible to me, please, Eva.
It's Scotland today. It's politicians and political parties entirely out of touch with reality or normalcy or how ordinary people think or how ordinary folk like us perceive politicians. It's like if somebody said, we'll put a man in charge of a rape crisis centre, it's that stupid. The sort of thing that should never happen and you never dreamt that you would live to see the day. And on that out of touch, you'll have noticed a story this week that I think is unfortunately really important, and it's very, very significant. And it's to do with the treatment of the local heroes at the 25th anniversary celebrations for the Scottish Parliament. Now, you would be like me, everybody here would think the same as me when the Scottish Parliament sat in 1999 for the first time, described by Winnie Ewing as reconvening, and Sheena Wellington sang, "A man's a man for all that." Was there a dry eye in the house? Was there hell? Probably just about everybody in the country would have had a lump in the throat at that stage. This year, for the 25th celebration, what did we have? Back to the horse's ass at the beginning of the show. We had the King And the Queen, who shouldn't be called the Queen, but I'm not bothered about that too much because I'm not a monarchist, but we had them in the Parliament, and we had dozens of people invited from all over Scotland who were described as local heroes. And they thought that they were invited to come along and join in the celebration of the People's Parliament. But very many of them, when they got there, were ushered into a wee room, a side room, not in the chamber itself, because the seats in the chamber were reserved for other people, particularly relatives of the MSPs, not the local heroes. So many of the local heroes shunted into a room that had a screen on which they could watch the proceedings, except it didn't work. So they sat in that room staring at a blank screen for a couple of hours. They were not allowed to leave the room until after the monarch had left the building. And some of these folk were grossly offended, and I think rightly so, by that conduct and the way that they were treated. These people travelled there under their own steam, at their own expense. Some very much looked forward to the event. They thought it would celebrate the people of Scotland and, you know, true Scottish values. It turned out to be, in essence, a brown-nosing exercise featuring and designed around a monarch with a Scottish crown sitting on a cushion. You know, how much more do the ordinary people of Scotland have to see before they understand that our politics needs an enormous reset? I mean, I'm almost at the level of talking about revolution, but we're not quite there yet. But by God, we need something big to happen, because that treatment of those folk that day deserves investigated, and it deserves exposed for exactly what it was, which was about celebrating the elite as opposed to celebrating democracy in our country.
Absolutely. On that topic, we should have maybe invited the King and Queen of Sweden. I mean, why, if you're going to have a foreign monarchy, let's do something different, because you had the King and Queen of England. Understand this, folks. Now, with this debate with a lot of knuckle-dragging British unionists, and the present king is not the King of Scots. There has been no monarch of Scots since 1714 when Queen Anne died, because none of them take the oath to Scotland, because the people are sovereign and they ain't having the people above it. It's an English king and an English queen that were in our Scottish Parliament. Why? Don't know. Shouldn't have been there. Should never be there. Get them out the way. Anyway, Lloyd, back to on that topic of local heroes and a bully getting the anti-bully job. It just is part of everything that is wrong with our politics.
Yes, it is. We say this just about every week as well. I think it was very, very interesting this week with the nonsense at the Parliament. I got a letter some months ago asking if I would be, as a former member of the Parliament, asking if I would be interested in taking part in this affair. But no communication from them since then. But I think really, really important thing to remember this week is, you know, our country is moving sharply away from a monarchist position. If I look at it from the perspective of one of the first public events I went to as a child, I think I was only about 3 or 4, was when the King of Norway came to Edinburgh and was met by the Queen, and they paraded through the town, and you couldn't move for people on the side of the streets. You know, there wasn't the crazy security there is now, but effectively the whole town came out to see the King of Norway and the Queen. This week, we've had the Prince of Wales in Aberdeen, and there's nobody in the streets. He's walking up the street with his equerry, and folk are going by him going, "How you doing, Willie?" And then there's those extraordinary pictures of the King and Queen in the car going up the high street and a jogger running down the other side of the street. Everybody knew they were coming. This is the sort of thing that would have been front page news and evening news even 10 years ago, the Edinburgh Evening News, that is, 10 years ago, and people would turn out. This week, we've had the two, you know, the king and the heir to the throne have been in Scotland, and frankly, nobody was interested. That, you know, in some ways, that's the highlight of my week, is the fact that the German-English monarchy got the bums rush for the people of Scotland. Thank you very much.
Here. Well, as a Republican myself, if they want to, they should have gone to Lark Hall, or maybe go to Ibrox on a Saturday, Yeah, it's the only places you're wanted. The rest of us don't want you. Don't want you at all. Phil, I want to move on because the clock's clicking on. You can comment on this by all means, but this is one for you. Eva mentioned it earlier, and it was this one before the election. It maybe goes some way to explain why the Labour is quickly, falling foul of the public opinion. They got a 4 billion bung from a hedge fund offshore, and then suddenly we now hear in her upcoming budget she's going to tone down the tax rate on rich non-doms. Just a coincidence. You know what I think about coincidences, but it's just a coincidence, I'm sure. Don't you think, Phil?
Yeah, coincidence my arse. It's a Cayman Island hedge fund donation of 4 million to Labour, as was said just before the rules came into place, just after the election was called. And the Telegraph reported on this, Nick Gutteridge. This is a Cayman Islands based hedge fund that handed Labour its largest ever donation. Right, 4 million, and it was just after the election was called, and it's called Quadrature Capital Limited, whose parent company is based in the Caribbean, a tax haven, of course. Donated 4 million to Starmer's war chest. Now, Labour just accepted it just before the rules kicked in. Isn't that convenient? And and this disclosure came. Number 10's embroiled in a row of the scale of gifts that have been handed out, and this is just more of the same. It's cheating. It's called cheating. It's called corruption. These people are buying the will and the policies of the Labour Party. That's what they're doing. I mean, Quadrature Capital. It's registered in central London and invests on part of the Quadrature Group, where the funds are kept for tax purposes. And the company said, right, this is what they said: we chose to support Labour because of the party's commitment to the green transition to the economy. My arse. They said, having analysed commitments set out by each party, we donated 4 million to the Labour Party in support of policies that will deliver climate action while also promoting social equality and economic resilience, it said. Aye, right, for the Cayman Islands. You chancing gets you total knobheads. And, the Independent comes in and Rachel Reeves, this is on the 27th September, suddenly Rachel Reeves could scrap non-dom tax raid, it was suggested. And she's saying, she might have to water down her plans to raid these non-doms mid-fears. This move would fail, and fail to raise any money, so what's the point? So she said she was going to, this is pre-election, we're going to raise about $1 billion a year, but cracking down on the tax perks available to these worthy foreign owners, and not living in the UK. But now they're saying, maybe it might not work. So I think we'll have to be pragmatic, not ideological. We won't press on regardless. We're not stupid, but we're not going to abandon this completely. No, you're going to talk about it and do bugger all as usual. You chance and corrupt the gets. Is the bottom line.
Coincidences, Phil. It's all just coincidences, isn't it? Bullies in charge of bullying, Alan. Non-dom's been excused after a 4 million donation, and there's this other one. Is this why Labour are already dropping in the polls dramatically? Here's this other one. This is my favourite. He vows to cut fuel bills. They went up by 10% this week. They only get in July. It continues, Alan. Every promise broken, all the shenanigans. They're liars, absolute liars.
Yeah, I mean, on the issue of people being appointed to places, thank God Gary Glitter was not on the council. He would have got children's services. But I mean, on the issue of the non-doms giving donations as well, I mean, you get someone from Russia or someone from Iran posting on Twitter saying they support Scottish independence, then they're interfering with British elections. But these chancellors are given billions of pounds for people to run their campaigns, and that's okay, son. But on the issue of Starmer, I mean, he is just... Pinocchio is not the word for him. I mean, he said when they discovered £22 billion black hole, he said they didn't expect it to be that high. A month earlier, at question time, he was questioning the Prime Minister on what he called a £44 billion black hole. So why wasn't his policies based on a £44 billion black hole? Because even with the $22 billion he'd had to spend, we'd had all that extra to spend. I mean, he's just a total and utter chancer, just like the rest of them. They will say anything they want you to hear, And once they're in power, they're there for at least 5 years. And because the other lot are so unpopular, they might even get another 5 years because they don't have to do anything. Oh, what are you going to do? No, come out and vote. Ha, ha, ha. We don't care because we'll still be in power. That's what they do. They try to take the hope and aspirations out of people. So as when their core vote comes out to vote, they'll always be there. And that's why we need this unity. That's why it's so important for people to come out and vote. Because if you don't vote, they win. So you're actually voting for them by default. So if you want honesty in politics, vote for the individual, not the party.
Yeah.
Vote for someone you trust.
Yeah. Absolutely agree with you, Alan. And more on that as the weeks go on, folks. Don't forget about Indy for Indy. It's coming back. But certain things are happening. I said at the beginning, Eva, that the big story, of course, is the conflict throughout the world. Now, one of the many reasons we want out of the British Union is the fact that we've been getting dragged into war since ever we get into it. We had never invaded a country until we joined the Union, and we've been doing it ever since. And even when you've got die-hard Brits like Robert Peston, and he's putting out this, he asked the PM whether he would join Israel in taking any offensive action against Iran, given that British forces have helped Israel. He said it would not be appropriate to comment on that. Now, he didn't comment on it, but we know that the Royal Air Force were involved during the week there, trying to shoot down Iranian missiles. They're not shooting down Israeli missiles going into Lebanon or to Palestine, which they could do, but they don't. Starmer has said he will be with Israel all the way. We've had John Healey, the Defence Secretary, saying he's going to give $3 billion every year to Ukraine. Are they trying to take us to war, Eva?
You certainly would think that. They're doing a good job of it. And in essence, Starmer is just another poodle to the Americans. That's all he is. He should be concentrating on what's happening in the UK as opposed to trying to hang on to American coattails and act the big man abroad, because that's all that this will achieve. More unnecessary bloodshed and horror and terror worldwide, and it'll all come back to haunt us, just as the impact of Tony Blair's illegal wars continue to affect us worldwide today and for a long time still to come. Domestic policy in the United Kingdom, though, is very, very poor. We know this for many different reasons. And what you'll have noticed this week is, while there's plenty of money being pledged to Ukraine or to defend Israel or whatever it is, the money that should be coming to Scotland to look after Scottish interests, particularly Grangemouth, those resources are being diverted. You've got announcements of carbon capture plants that are going to be facilitated and funded in the north of England, and Scotland loses out yet again. You never hear the word Grangemouth mentioned other than by my MP, who said vote Labour to save Grangemouth, and he's now running a petition to try to persuade his own party to save the refinery that Keir Starmer never wants to talk about. So there are lots of reasons to get away from the Union, war being pretty near the top of the list, if not the most important reason, because it is embarrassing and it's deadly dangerous to be part of this Union now, given the way that they're behaving internationally.
Absolutely. And your previous Member of Parliament said, vote for me so you don't get dragged out of the European Union. How did that one work out? That's the thing. We're really getting a worry here, Lloyd. I mean, this week we had Iran getting a reprisal, if you like, for what happened to them. It was illegal. They acted within international law. But again, the victim, Israel, invaded another country. They went into Lebanon. But of course, the day that the tanks rolled across into Ukraine from Russia, huge invasion, be disgusted. How did the BBC describe it? What happened in Lebanon? It's an incursion. An incursion. It's not an invasion. But when the Russians do it, it's a terrible invasion. It's wrong. We can't do it. Send them to The Hague. Sanction them, 18,000 sanctions. Not for Israel. An incursion, not an invasion, Lloyd. What do you think?
I just find it incredible that we allow a rogue nation and a rogue state like Israel to police the language of the world. Effectively, as part of their foreign policy, is is the policing of language, and that focuses right on their the international definition of anti-Semitism, which was prepared, developed, and given to the world by the psychological warfare unit of Mossad. That's the basis of it. They want to control our language, and the strange thing about it is our politicians, particularly, respond to this. You can see them being so careful in the manner and the usage of language, particularly with regard to Israel. It's like they all live in fear of being accused of something, so they skirt around and skirt around. I think the other thing that's become so obvious this week is that the British government is so completely in hoc to individuals who are connected to the Israeli regime that they're prepared to make policy on the basis of these things. I mean, I'll give you one simple example. Keir Starmer comes on television the other day and announces that there will be a bill about assisted dying, will go through the Westminster Parliament very soon, because he promised Esther Ranson. Wasn't in the BBC, it wasn't in the Labour Party's manifesto, but he announces to the world that an assisted dying bill will go through the Westminster Parliament because his pal Esther wants it. Now, if that's not policing your language and policing your politics, what is? Who does this guy think he is, that he gets elected as the Prime Minister of the country, announces on television? I mean, and this gives you the measure of the intellect of this man, which he can't be stupid. But some of the time he says and does the most ridiculous things. How he doesn't understand that standing on television and saying, I am putting this piece of legislation through the Parliament because my pal Esther wants it. Does he not see what that looks like? It's absolutely, I mean,
or does he care?
I don't think he's got the ability to care. I mean, in direct answer to you, Roddy, I've been wrestling with this. I look at him, I see pictures of him, I hear him speak, and I find it difficult to ascertain whether or not he is robot or human, to be perfectly honest with you. And I don't mean that in a jokey kind of a sense. There's a coldness about this man. There is a kind of plodding, methodological use of language by him, which, I mean, yes, fair enough, he's a lawyer and some lawyers speak like that, but not like this guy. He's a very, I genuinely, sometimes I think to myself, has he got an on and off switch? There appears to be no emotion. When he shows emotion, it's like emotion is purged from the room. He's a strange creature. He's a very, very strange creature. But and so unconventional. It is a fairly unconventional approach to politics to say that you'll make policy on the basis of what your pal wants you to do.
Yeah.
Come on.
I wish I could get a Prime Minister as my pal, by God, what the announcements would be coming out then. Woohoo! But you know what I mean? Your description of Starmer, there was a programme on the Sci-Fi Channel where the people looked perfectly human, but when they pulled back the face, it was like a Skeletor with red flashing eyes. Maybe he's an alien. Maybe he is. He was a pal of Jimmy Savile's as well, wasn't he?
Ooh.
Say no more. Lloyd asked a question, Phil. Are they in charge? Well, why are they in charge? Well, here you are. The former British minister thinks that the Israelis control the Foreign Office, and they do. That's Sir Alan Duncan, who was in that, and says that we are controlled from Tel Aviv, as is Washington. And it's amazing how they've done it with American money. Of course, America funds Israel, who then takes some of that money and blackmail or bribe, whatever you want to call it, buy all these politicians throughout the world. They do run our Foreign Office, it would seem.
Well, it would seem that way, but that's a massive story. But why is it not all over the
Why?
news?
You know
Why?
why. You're being rhetorical, aren't you?
Yeah. And this is deadly serious. When we say deadly serious, in the middle of last month, we all almost died, all of us, and there was nothing in the news about it. And on that coldness on Starmer that Lloyd touched on, um, is he determined to take us to war? He, he, yes, he doesn't care enough about what people want to stand up to his greedy corporate warmongering bosses. So that's all of these questions answered in one statement. I mean, if you check the Reuters report on the September 14th, the UK's Starmer, right, was in Washington for talks with Biden on Ukraine missile use. Now, what is that about? Well, Starmer met Biden, okay, and it was about to let Ukraine fire Western missiles, including long-range US ATACMS and British Storm Shadows, deep into Russia to limit Moscow's ability to launch attacks. Now, you should listen, people. You need to go beyond the mainstream media. Look at Colonel Douglas Macgregor. Look at the Grey Zone. Look, and we should do lists of these people where our fellow Scots can find the truth, because you're not going to find it in mainstream media. But certainly Scott Ritter reported on this. In the red case that Starmer was carrying, with the papers to permit the use of these weapons, British and American weapons, by Ukraine to attack deep into Russian territory. Now, why is that an issue? Well, what you're not being told is that these weapons cannot be used without American military hands and British military hands making them work, setting it all up and providing targeting, launch codes, etc. And Russia warned the UK and America and the West in numerous times and live in the Security Council meeting before it, that they knew this, and that if the US and UK used these weapons, then to allow the Ukrainians to attack, then this would be done with the hands-on of American and British military personnel. And that will be a declaration of war, and targets in the UK, the EU, and the USA will be destroyed.
Yep. Two
Now,
things
this
I
is.
said to you. Sorry, sorry to interrupt you there, Phil,
Carry on.
but these Storm Shadow missiles, which are made just outside Glasgow, incidentally, so there you go, the target, they cannot be fired or directed without the help of satellites and British technology and British satellites and British servicemen directing them. That's the danger we've got, folks.
Yeah, and the other thing that makes me laugh about this, and not laugh, it's deadly serious, is, you were talking earlier about how we were helping try to shoot down the missiles going into Israel. Israel has the most complex and modern missile defense system in the planet. And it couldn't stop and cannot stop hypersonic missiles. Kinshal and the Iranian, Russian and Chinese missiles are unstoppable at the minute by Western technologies. And Britain's out there trying to help, not just giving beds to Ukraine, we're trying to shoot down missiles coming into Israel when we don't have a dedicated missile defense system in the UK. We've got some capability, but we're not even close to being as good as where Israel is. And here we are wandering off, and Starmer's doing what he's told, and we're dicing with it. We're playing Russian roulette here. We're the closest we've ever been to nuclear war and the decimation of humanity since the Cuban Missile Crisis, and nobody's talking about it, and that should horrify us all.
Indeed. And the British got their arses kicked out of Iraq, chased out of Iraq and Afghanistan by tribesmen, and you want to take on the Russians. This lot couldn't fight the Salvation Army. I tell you, our army's never been weaker. And I don't want to see any Scots. Boy, 28% of the services are made up of Scots, although we're only 8% of the population, folks. I don't want to see any Scottish boys dying in any more Anglo-Little Englander wars. Alan, do you think that Starmer is determined to take us, for whatever his reasons are, into war?
Well, I think Starmer's boss is definitely determined to take us into war. Because Starmer doesn't make the decisions himself. Now, we just have to look, because Starmer works for the same person Boris Johnson works for. Let's not forget, Ukraine war would have been ended if it wasn't for Johnson going over to Ukraine and stopping him from signing the peace deal. Wars make a lot of money for their friends. It's like financial crashes. They are always manipulated, and it is a policy to go into these things. It is not done by accident. And until we start fixing that problem and getting this big money out of bloody politics, we're never, ever going to be in a safe world. But even going into Israel, why don't we ever learn from our history? Israel went into Palestine, started wiping out the Palestinians, like Germany went into
Poland.
Yeah. And we appeased both. Now Israel is going further, going into Lebanon now. How far are they going to get to go before somebody takes action against them, especially when they have been called out for using genocide? Remember, at the beginning of the war, Hitler hadn't. We already know what the Israelis are doing, and we are still appeasing them. So stop the funding immediately. Start issuing arrest warrants for Netanyahu. That man should be in The Hague, not addressing the UN.
Correct.
It's bloody ridiculous. And it's learn from our history. Don't repeat it.
It was great that his speech at the UN, I don't know if anyone saw it, but most of the people walked out. The only ones that stayed in were the usual suspects, but practically every other nation in the world walked out. And that was joyous to see. But the other thing is, the day after the the retaliatory strike by the Iranians, the Israelis, of course, being the Israelis, then went to Syria and hit. But what they did was they hit a Russian base and Russian ammunition. The following day, the Russians have issued the following warning to every Russian citizen in Israel: get out now. So maybe, Alan, the answer to your question is someone maybe is about to hit them, and someone that can hit back, and that it could be the Russians. You just don't know. Folks, we've run out of time. One last thing I just want to say and talk about, I don't know if you've heard it. In the 1960s, the Americans, out of spite because they had a communist neighbour, brought a blockade against Cuba, and it's been in place ever since, and it's causing immense trouble to the Cuban people. It's a shame. It really is disgraceful what's happened. They're a small island, and they're deprived of so much because of American spite. Well, there was a vote this week in the UN to lift the blockade. America's ignoring it, of course, but here's the answer, folks. The only nations that opposed it were the United States of America, Israel, and Ukraine abstained. The rest of the world said, America, lift the blockade. What do you think is going to happen? They ain't going to lift it. America doesn't give a shit about democracy, international law. They only care about themselves and their military-industrial complex. Anyway, folks, we've run out of time. I hope you've enjoyed this as much as I have, as always, talking to my dear friends here. And until we see you again, you and yours, please, take care.
Through a Scottish Prism, the programme that is unapologetically pro-Scottish independence and anti-Westminster rule. Everything we say here is viewed through a Scottish prism. Brought to you by Barhead Boy.